Hello everyone, there's Caesar. So I have a book review for you today, and it is from Transgender to Transhuman by Martine Rothblatt. Now I knew nothing about Martine Rothblatt when I first picked up this book. Looked her up after I started reading it and came to realize that she actually she's a trans woman, and she started Sirius XM Radio, and excuse me, Caesar, you just bit a hole in there. And also currently is CEO of, and I think started a biotechnology company. So clearly, very entrepreneurial and smart, incredibly smart person. Now I really try to go into this with an open mind, and I'm going to try to leave my personal feelings about the specific subject out of this review. I want to just review the book itself. And so basically the gist of it is that that technology has essentially made transgenderism possible, and that the sexes are essentially the same. There's no difference between them. That it's all in the mind, it has nothing to do with the body, and that ultimately it's going to lead to transhumanism where we're all uploading our consciousness into computers and interacting in the cyber realm. So that's the gist of the book. And she tries to come at it from like a kind of pseudo-scientific perspective. But through the whole thing, the book contradicts itself constantly. One thing that I've noticed that people in this, with this view will tell you, well, sex and gender are different. And it says that in the book, sex and gender are different, but then it goes on to conflate sex and gender constantly. Sex, gender, sexuality, it constantly conflates all of it together and as if it's the same thing, but then says that it's not the same thing. So that's one of those things. It's like, well, if it's not the same thing, why do you keep calling it this? She does praise the person, John Money, who came up with the whole concept of gender. And if you don't know who John Money is, look him up. And form your own opinion about that. And then, like, the foreword also highly praises, or at one point praises Kinsey, who also has an interesting background. Again, look him up. And these two people specifically, and there's some other people too, are really where like gender came from. And if you look them up and really research who they were and what they believed, and what they did, it'll make you just form your opinion about that. But anyway. So she throughout the thing just basically makes statements, does not back them up by anything, does not cite anything. There's a list of suggested reading at the beginning. Two of the books, it has only a handful of books on it. Two of them are hers. Two of them Martine Rothblatt wrote. Another one is Herbert Marcuse, his most famous, which is Eros and Civilization, I believe. Yeah, Eros and Civilization. I mean, and if you know anything about Herbert Marcuse, again, look him up. Was a communist from the 60s, and so nothing is cited. There's no list of citations. She does quote, and any books or quotes that are referenced like within the text actually aren't part of the suggested reading list. You would think that those things that are actually in the book would be part of the suggested reading list, but they're not. So you really can't like confirm anything that she says because she doesn't give any citations. Like she mentions some studies and stuff, but then doesn't cite them. So you can't really you're not really going to be able to find exactly what she's talking about because she doesn't cite it. And then we'll just, come at science from like a, like she'll say, well, there are trends, like men, the trend for men is this, the trend for women is over here, but there's this overlap, and because there's this overlap, well, then the trends don't matter and we're all the same. That's a little bit misleading because trends do matter, and the fact that there are trends means that we're not the same. It shows that we're not the same, not because that there's some variability doesn't mean that there aren't these major overarching trends on one side and the other. And then, and I think also, like she says, that like there are millions of millions of sexualities. Like everyone has their own sexuality. Well, that sounds like personality to me. I think like conflating sexuality with personality as if the only part of your personality that matters is your sexuality kind of like was what I kind of got out of it. And then like it seems like when she talks about history, it's all from the Greco-Roman times. Well, back in Greco-Roman times and since, there was a lot of history before that. But that's not really mentioned at all. And, that's a lot of picking and choosing, and, and she does get into basically, well, because men and women are the same, men and women and should be able to just play sports together, and this is one of those times it's like she just says stuff and you're supposed to take it as fact, like saying that, well, because some fish start out as, one, male and then transition to female throughout their lives, then that can be extrapolated to humans. Well, no, it can't. That's not how science works. Or at one point she says that humans are the only animals on the planet, like literally says the only animals on the planet that have sex for fun, that have sex for anything other than procreation, which is not true. It's not true. There are other animals on the planet that have sex for fun. Bonobos and dolphins are the first that come to mind. So to say that no other animal on the planet has sex for fun is just patently false. And this book was written in 2011. It is self-published. We knew this in 2011. I mean, I read about bonobos back in college. So, it's not like this is new information. It's self-published, so it does have a lot of, generally self-published books tend to have a lot of typos and stuff, which this does. So there's just things like that where you're like, well, no, that's not true. And no, you can't extrapolate what fish and amphibians, their life cycles are and correlate with them with human life cycles. Like, you just can't. They don't match. We're not fish. So just because some animals can do this naturally or do it naturally as part of their natural life cycle doesn't mean that the same applies to humans. And then she then, like, at one point when she's talking about men and women playing sports together, I literally laughed out loud at this sentence because I just couldn't believe it was written. She says that the only reason that women are barred from playing men's sports is because, or playing against men in sports, is to save men the embarrassment of losing to women. And I literally laughed out loud when I read that sentence. I couldn't help it, because there is no rule in men's sports barring women from playing them. Women could play men's sports, but they don't qualify. There's a couple of examples. A woman, this was a long time ago, I think it was in high school when this happened, and I can't remember her name, but there was a woman on the LPGA tour, a woman golfer, a female golfer who just was slaughtering the other women. I mean, she killed them, like, just was playing ridiculously well. Nobody could beat her. No woman could beat her. And so she was like, you know what? I'm going to play with the men. I'm beating all the women. I'm just going to play with the men instead. And she couldn't cut it in the men's league. She couldn't cut it in the PGA. She played, like, it didn't last very long. I don't remember how long it lasted, but it did not last very long. And there have been a handful of women who have tried out as kickers for the NFL, and they don't make it. Not one of them has made it yet into the NFL. But they try. Every few years, some woman tries, a soccer player or whatever. And she said, like, her argument is that, well, the only reason why men aren't as good, or why women aren't as good at sports as men, is because they've been kept down by not being allowed to compete with them. But again, it's not the case. They just have never qualified. I mean, another example is, the famous tennis players, the sisters, I can't remember their names at the moment, I'm totally blanking on them. They were, the number one ranked tennis players in the world, female tennis players in the world at the time, and one of them played a game with, like, the 300 and somethingth player, men's player. He was ranked at like 300 something, and he was smoking and drinking in between sets, and she lost to him. And that's not saying anything against women. There are some incredible female athletes, but they are not as good as men. They are not. They're in a different league from men. Like the World Cup winning female soccer team lost to, like, 15-year-old boys when they played them. It's just not the same, and it's coming from someone who has done sports all of her life. I've done sports all my life. I compete in a sport currently where men and women compete completely on the same level. Completely on the same level. And the only reason why that's possible is because we're sitting on horses. So we compete with each other evenly because we have a horse that equalizes us. So this idea that women will, it's just not true, and it shows a complete lack of understanding of biology. So there's just, like, stuff like that, and and then she'll say, like, even the geneticists agree, and I think it was about, like, saying that there's more nature versus nurture in sexuality, which may be the case. I don't know. But when you make a blanket statement that even the geneticists agree, well, which geneticists, how many of them cite the papers that you're talking about when you say this? There is none of that. So you can't verify any of the statements. It's just opinion at that point, which is fine if that's what you want to go for, but you're talking like it's not opinion. You're talking like it's fact. So yeah, it was, and that's before you even get to, like, the transhuman stuff, which is kind of out there. Like, if you're talking transhuman, like, we're eventually all gonna, like, we all have cell phones in our pockets, and we interact with and eventually maybe some part of that, like with Neuralink, will be implanted available to be implanted in people's brains at some point. And if you call that transhuman, okay, I can see that. But if you're talking about like fully uploading your consciousness into a computer, I mean, first of all, we have no idea how the human brain works. I mean, we have a small idea, but I think we know less about the human brain than we do about space. We know less about the human brain than we know about the ocean. We kind of know nothing. We don't even know where consciousness comes from. And to say that then you can upload that to a computer that doesn't work in any way similar to a human brain, and you can just say it like, yep, it's going to happen. And it's going to happen because we have the technology, and because, we have the technology to make men and women the same. We also have the technology to upload consciousness, and we're all going to be living in cyberspace someday. Like, that's a little over the top for me. So, yeah, I mean, there is one thing that I did completely agree with her on in this book, and that is that she talks about how science is funded, scientific research is funded, and that oftentimes it's really hard for research scientists to go against the grain, to go against what's commonly what the common narrative is in whatever area of science you're studying. It's hard to go against that because you're not going to get the funding to study it. And that I completely agree with, and that needs to change. That is one thing that I like. It is true that, because that's just not science. If you can't get funding to because what you're going to study may not agree with the going narrative, I guess, is the term I'm coming to right now. But if you're that's not science. You should be able to study everything. So anyway, this book was interesting. It was a quick read. But it definitely, I don't think it accomplished the goal that the person writing it really wanted to accomplish. It did not convince me. If you want to convince me, you're going to have to actually cite sources, and not just cherry pick, because you can find, data on both sides of the coin on a lot of this. So, and again, this was written in 2011, so this was before a lot of stuff that's going on now. So it's interesting that some of the stuff in this book is playing itself out now, and it's not going the way this person predicted, let's say. So anyway, yep, that's From Transgender to Transhuman. I might get a lot of flack for this video, we'll see. But it didn't convince me of anything, because there wasn't any. It was just this person's opinion, which is fine. They're allowed to have their opinion, but also don't make false statements, multiple false statements or blanket statements that I'm supposed to take as truth. And it may or may not be. I mean, like I said, like geneticists might agree on whatever, but just to say that they do doesn't mean that they do. And I, cite stuff. So yeah, that's that. Check it out if you want to. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see what kind of comments I get on this one. I have a feeling it's gonna be rough. But anyway, it was I went way over, way too long on this, but I will see you all tomorrow with a new video. I hope you all have a great day. Hit the like button, share, subscribe, and I will see you then. Bye.